From the banks of Scotland to the California coast, into the mountains like a child. They said that he was crazy for the trees, they were his friends. He was a man of nature, would defend her till the end. Cross the rivers far and wide, to the forest like a mother to her child. How the canyons and the mountains sing. John Muir's out there, if only we believe. How men rape the forest, move the earth to build the mines. Gold the only lure for their crimes. John would never let the axe bite or that shovel fall. He tried to save the beauty for us one and all. Cross the rivers far and wide, to the forest like a mother to her child. How the canyons and the mountains sing. John Muir's out there, if only we believe. Cross the rivers far and wide, to the forest like a mother to her child. How the canyons and the mountains sing. John Muir's out there, if only we believe. The rainforest now depleted, no ozone, the sun will shine. Don't we know we're running out of time? Are we all such fools to rob this world blind? Don't we know tomorrow never waits on mankind? Cross the rivers far and wide, to the forest like a mother to her child. How the canyons and the mountains sing. John Muir's out there, if only we believe.
Skagway's colorful past is reminiscent in the buildings and the turn-of-the-century architecture, and many of the buildings on Broadway date back to the gold rush.
Carcross is looked at, I think, very ideally by a lot of people because it's a small town. It's in a very beautiful location in the mountains and the lakes, and it's also very close to our capital cities.
There were about 200 of these vessels going up and down the Yukon River. They were the lifeline of the Yukon. They opened her up and let it so that us Yukoners could be here today.
You don't have to live in any Southeast community very long before you've driven from one end of every highway to the other end many times. Hello, I'm Scott Foster, and welcome to Rain Country. And every once in a while, despite the advantages of living in Southeast, you get that itch to spend a little time on the open road. Well, this week we got that itch. Hand on the wheel, the foot on the pedal, and we're heading down the highway. When you decide to do that in Southeast, everybody starts at the same spot, at the State Ferry Terminal.
Where the ferry trip ends, the highway trip begins, and we'll be heading up the highway to places like Carcross and Whitehorse, over to Haines Junction and down to Haines. That route is promoted as the Golden Circle route. You can start in either Haines or Skagway. We chose Skagway. This is a town whose name means the Great North Wind. It also comes from the Tlingit word, or you never breathe the same air twice. Before heading on down the highway, we're going to spend a little time looking at some of the sights in Skagway.
We have an awful lot of product for people to see and look at. Skagway's colorful past is reminiscent in the buildings and the turn-of-the-century architecture, and many of the buildings on Broadway date back to the gold rush. And that whole setting, that whole Broadway atmosphere is really carried out through the entire community. There's shows to see, entertainment, and just walking around Broadway gives you that sense of yesteryear and that wonderment of the thousands of hardy souls that must have come through here in their search of gold.
Another place to see a bit of history is in the Trail of 98 City Museum. It features the gold rush and native artifacts, but has an unusual assortment of historic bits and pieces filling all available wall and floor space. The museum building has some history of its own. It was built in 1900 as Alaska's first institute of higher learning, but it quickly folded. It was also U.S. District Court No. 1. The Skagway Downtown Historic District is part of the Klondike Gold Rush National Historical Park. Park headquarters is a good spot to find out about daily activities and begin the immersion into Gold Rush history. Inside, photos and movies show some of the history. In the first year of the rush, some 25,000 struggled from Skagway over the passes into Canada. Shortly after that, the White Pass and Yukon Railroad route was built over the White Pass. It runs today, carrying passengers 28 miles to Fraser, British Columbia. A different Skagway perspective comes from the air. Helicopters and fixed-wing planes provide flights over the Chilkoot Pass and to other attractions. For those wanting to literally walk in the minor steps, the 33-mile Chilkoot Trail has been described as a hike through the longest museum in the world. Considerably shorter walks are conducted daily in town by National Park Service rangers, who explain that at the height of the gold rush boom, Skagway had 20,000 people and no law and order.
One of the people to hear about that event was a man by the name of Jefferson Randolph Smith, who at that time was living in Leadville, Colorado. His nickname he went by the misnomer of Soapy Smith. He was kind of a con man, a confidence man. One of the main
Soapy Smith and his group of con men worked at relieving those on the way to the gold fields of their money. Eventually, local residents had had enough. There was a fight between Frank Reed and Soapy. The results of that meeting are visible in the small cemetery on the outskirts of Skagway. Skagway's colorful early days are now remembered in tombstones and restored buildings. One woman who was born and raised in this most northern southeast community has seen common threads through the town's economic ups and downs.
Even from the very earliest days, Skagway got lots of tourists. Although in the prime days, after World War II and before the closure of the railroad, we had a great economy with year-round jobs on the railroad. And we were about the only town in southeast, really in all of Alaska, that had steady year-round jobs and not this big seasonal thing. And after the mine closed and the railroad closed, why, we had to let tourism pick up the whole scene. Unfortunately, we had tourism.
A town that runs on tourism is a hectic town for at least part of the year. It's a characteristic shared by most other towns along the Golden Circle Highway route.
Well, in the summer, we meet ourselves coming and going. We're just running practically 24 hours a day, coping with tourists and keeping our businesses going and holding down our jobs, telling people we don't have a house or room to rent after all. And in the wintertime, why, we just settle back to a normal pace.
The summer pace means dealing with visitors every day and answering their questions. Some questions are asked over and over again and prompt a quiet desperation.
If one more person says, "What do you do in the winter?" Or they walk up from the ship and they say, "What's the altitude here? Do you have a school? Do you have a post office?" Well, what do you think we have, for crying out loud? We're a town just like anybody else. Yes, we have a school and a post office. And the altitude depends on whether the tide is in or out.
For the year-round residents, when everybody's gone and you're back to the other kind of life, what do you do for fun, for relaxation? What do you do?
What do we do in the winter?
No, I don't.
Well, we have clubs, we have bowling. We visit each other, and you can do something every damn night of the week if you let yourself get involved. Because there is lots of activity, lots of social activity, just like there would be anywhere else.
Most of us from Southeast who come to Skagway, we see all the stores, we see all of the history, the park service and the railroad, and we take that in, and then we move on. Mm-hmm. But you don't move on, you live here. What's the other side of Skagway that we don't see as much when we're visitors in your town?
Well, I think the other side is that Skagway is a nice, comfortable little town to live in. It's a great little town. In wintertime, we all know each other, and we can walk to anything we want to go to. We don't have to fight traffic or anything. It's comfortable and relaxing to live in Skagway, and it's nice to interact with a big family of people that you know.
Winter or summer, families and visitors to Skagway and nearby Haines can do what no one else in Southeast except Hyder residents can, and that's get away by road. The road connecting these two Alaska towns is 359 miles, goes over 2 mountain passes, and circles through Whitehorse and Haines Junction. Each year, an estimated 20,000 people take the trip and enjoy the sights along the way.
It doesn't take long after you leave Skagway and sea level to hit the hills, heading on up towards the White Pass summit. In 14 miles, you gain about 3,300 feet. And going over the pass, the climate is likely to change from the rainforests of Southeast into the more dry interior of Canada. For people in Skagway, when they ask one another if they're going to Whitehorse, the way they phrase it is, going up the hill? That's exactly what we're doing. We just passed over the summit. The water on that side flows 20 miles into the Pacific Ocean. The water here on this side goes into the Yukon 2,300 miles before it gets to the open sea.
It's a tremendously scenic. The Klondike Highway and the Haines Highways have been described as some of the most scenic highways in all the continent. And you traverse the coast mountains through Skagway and follow the White Pass Trail, and it's just spectacular, just beautiful.
This route isn't all gold rush history. Earlier natives used this same valley to trade rainforest and ocean products for desired commodities from the interior. In fact, these routes were called grease trails for one of the products, a fish oil valued as a delicacy. During the gold rush, this was also known as the Dead Horse Trail because of the more than 3,000 that died carrying miners' gear. Mounties posted in the past made sure everyone carried enough food and gear to live for a year in the Yukon. Today, Mounties are replaced by customs agents. Crossing the border is usually easy and quick. Neither passports nor visas are required for Americans, but birth certificates to prove citizenship are suggested. Auto insurance is required. Visitors should check the details before entering Canada. This is the start of the area Yukoners call the Southern Lakes, a transition area between the summit and the interior valleys. It's an area of long vistas and high peaks. The perspective changes when humans and their machines follow the road as it climbs, dips, and curves along the lakes into the town of Carcross.
The name Carcross actually originally came from Caribou Crossing. It was a longer name, and it was shortened by Bishop Bompas, who was the famous bishop at that time in this area during the gold rush. And he lived in Carcross. He had his home here, and also he built a little Anglican church here. And he's the one, his mail kept going to other places in Canada, Caribou and other crossings, and so he requested that the name be shortened to Carcross, and that's what we have now.
The town has grown since the first native people came to this narrow spot between two large lakes because of the fish and caribou that migrated through. A more permanent population came when the White Pass Railroad was built. The Golden Spike, linking the line between Skagway and Whitehorse, was driven in front of the depot. The old railroad station is now the Visitor Information Center and a must-stop in Carcross for those wanting listings of current activities and helpful information about the area. Tourists will see a few early transportation relics that still stand. At the turn of the century, the Duchess carried tourists on their way to Áak'w between boats on different lakes. About 350 call Carcross home. Like other northern communities, much of the work is seasonal, and government projects provide many of the employment opportunities. Residents also hunt, trap, and cater to the tourist trade. The old cabins along the water, like some other buildings in town, were moved from earlier mining boom towns in the area that have since gone bust. Each of these parts of history contribute to the character of this small town located between Whitehorse and Skagway.
Carcross is looked at, I think, very ideally by a lot of people because it's a small town. It's in a very beautiful location in the mountains and the lakes, and it's also very close to our capital city. So it's just an hour's drive from Whitehorse. It's also a very beautiful drive from Whitehorse to Skagway. So it's in the best of locations, you know, halfway to the coast and halfway to our capital, where you can basically be involved with anything you like. So you have a mixture, the best of all things, really, by living in Carcross.
We were in Skagway talking with a woman who lives there all year round, and she said she gets so tired of people asking her, well, what do you do in the winter in a little town like this? But can I, for fear of embarrassing myself, ask you what goes on in the winter in Carcross?
In the winter you catch up, supposedly. I've never been so busy in my life. I've lived in a lot of other places, but since I've moved to the Yukon 13 years ago, I've never been so busy in my life, you know, because basically in a small town you're picking up on a lot of activities and you're heading them instead of just being a participant. As well, I'm an artist, so I do artwork, and I'm a wife, and I have a family, and so there's all those sort of things. Visiting takes place in the wintertime. You just don't have time in the summertime as much to do those sort of things.
Before leaving, one sight to see is the Carcross Cemetery. It's located just outside of town. Buried nearby is Polly the parrot. The bird was famous for its drinking and swearing, and had seen a lot of Yukon history before dying in 1972 at the age of 125.
Well, the cemetery is probably the most famous cemetery in the Yukon because it has all the Gold Rush characters buried there. There's Kate Carmax and Skookum Jim and George Carmax, and there's Bishop Bumpus. Basically, all the ones that discovered the gold in the Dawson area, in the Klondike area, they're all buried in Carcross.
A short distance outside of Carcross on the road to Whitehorse is a sign like those frequently seen along roads announcing an attraction. This one has one of those arresting claims that end in EST, such as longest, highest, deepest, and in this case, smallest, as in world's smallest desert. As the sign explains, this area is a former glacial lake, but when the glacier retreated, the water level dropped and the sandy lake bottom was left behind. Local winds coming off Lake Bennett constantly move the sand, making it difficult for plants to grow. From Carcross, it's about an hour's drive to Whitehorse. This is an area allowing rural living with easy access to the Yukon's largest city. The Golden Circle Highway route covers only a small section of the vast Yukon, an area 25% larger than California, but with a total population smaller than Juneau. A roadside pullout is strategically placed because the striking colors in the lake below demand a closer look than can be obtained by just driving by. The emerald and blue hues come from light waves reflected by pulverized white shells on the lake's bottom. They remain from a much greater lake that once filled this entire valley. From Emerald Lake, it's only 35 miles to Whitehorse.
Traveling these roads, it's hard to avoid a sense of history. You start in Skagway, the staging area for the gold rush, go over the White Pass, and then you get down into the lake country and into Carcross. It was in that area after the miners got over the passes where they had to build boats so they could go through the lakes and then finally into the Yukon River so they'd eventually get to the Klondike. When you get outside of Whitehorse, that history continues. And one of the places to see it is right here at Miles Canyon.
In 1898, Miles Canyon didn't look as peaceful as it does today. That was before a dam a few miles downriver backed up water and flooded the rapids. Then, getting through the rapids, some of the roughest on the entire Yukon, was another of the major obstacles facing gold seekers. An entry in an early edition of the Klondike Nugget described the run through Miles Canyon this way, quote, "The boats filed into that tremendous first section of the canyon, dodged the whirlpool in the middle, rushed down the second section of the canyon, tossed around for a while in the seething water of the rapids, made that stupendous turn into Whitehorse, as with rapidly accelerating speed they plunged into the final chaos of angry waters, end quote. The Mounties quickly established requirements that experts were required to pilot boats through the rapids. Today, the once treacherous canyon is one of the scenic viewpoints in the Whitehorse area. In fact, the name of the town came from these rapids. They reminded miners of the flowing manes of white horses. Shortly after the initial gold rush, riverboats appeared on the Yukon and provided a much easier means of transportation. A few of them still remain today.
So, welcome to the SS Klondike. The SS Klondike 1 was built in 1929 and ran the river route until 1936, when unfortunately she had a major accident and almost the entire vessel was destroyed. However, they did manage to save the superstructure and most of the machinery and equipment. She was rebuilt, launched again in 1937, and named the SS Klondike No. 2, which you are actually standing on today. She then ran until 1950 as a cargo passenger vessel, and in 1950 was changed strictly for passengers, running until 1955. In the 1960s, Parks Canada decided to commemorate the Yukon River boats, so they restored her to her original form. Everything you see will be the 1937 to 1940 era. The handle right above you there is for a spotlight on the roof, and this here is for the steam whistle. Also, we've got a compass down here, but they were on a river, so they never had to use that, but it was navigational law to carry it. Over here, this is just a wind dodger. They had to keep windows open at all times so you can always hear your vessel. So that just simply broke the wind from hitting you in the face.
How high is this off the water?
When this is in water, the wheelhouse is 44 feet high, so it's quite a ways.
We got a cowbell for our cabin.
Oh, really? I forgot to mention, though, anybody who rings the bell on board has just offered to buy a round for the crew. So, there were about 200 of these vessels going up and down the Yukon River. They were the lifeline of the Yukon. They opened her up and let it so that us Yukoners could be here today and be visited by people from all over the world. So thank you very much for coming.
Whitehorse got its real start when the White Pass and Yukon Railroad connected the town with the saltwater port of Skagway in 1900. In 1953, the provincial seat of government was moved from Dawson to Whitehorse. Today, it's a modern city in the midst of vast areas with little or no population. It sits between the Yukon River and the Alaska Highway. The highway starts 900 miles away at Dawson Creek, British Columbia. It's 600 miles from Whitehorse to Fairbanks. When residents of Whitehorse describe their town, they use similar words as some of those who live in Carcross and Skagway.
Well, the town has two different moods. In the summertime, you're looking at tourists and visitors that come up to the Yukon, either on their way to Alaska or on their way up to the Arctic Circle if they're going to Nunavut to do the top of the world and that sort of thing. So you end up with that sort of a mood in the summer. In the wintertime, you become a sort of a closed community where you have all your friends, and all at once you can spend some time and visit with them and enjoy the winter activities.
And for those of us that really don't know Whitehorse at all, can you kind of characterize sort of the spirit, the feeling, the mood of a town like this?
Well, I don't know. I guess when I first moved up here, I was really struck by the feeling that you could do anything here. There's a sense of possibility. If that sort of captures it, I don't know, it comes close, I think. You know, you come up here from the south where there's a lot of rules and regulations, and there's still that sort of spirit here that, you know, you're on the edge of the wilderness here, and you can make it or break it.
One group that has made it in Whitehorse is the Frantic Follies, a performing company that puts on nightly music comedy reviews. Like other aspects of tourist-oriented attractions along the Golden Circle Highway route, this show works off the local gold rush history. Whitehorse is the largest city on the Golden Circle route that connects Skagway and Haines by highway, and it offers big city attractions like golf courses.
Take that.
Colorful botanical gardens growing in profusion 400 miles south of the Arctic Circle. A museum that has a botanical garden of its own on the roof. And Sam McGee's cabin with the insides set up like he had just left it and rushed off to his fateful gold-seeking effort on Lake LaBarge. We'll visit them and more before getting back on the highway and continuing this Golden Circle odyssey. From Whitehorse, it's 100 miles down the Alaska Highway to Haines Junction and the headquarters for Kluane National Park. From there, the road leads to the $1 Million Falls before dropping down the pass into Haines with its own version of history and recreation. That's all coming up when our journey continues with part 2 of the drive along the Golden Circle.
You're invited to join us then on our next edition of Rain Country. I'm Scott Foster. Have a good day.
Of desperation in 1942, when the rest of the world was off at war. The armies got together on what they had to do, even though it was never done before. They pushed a strip of gravel through the northern wilderness, 1,500 miles of mud and dust and snow. 8 months after they started, it was finished more or less. But the changes it brought on, they couldn't know. More than just a highway, it symbolizes dreams. For the people who have used it, it is more than what it seems. Through the mountains, bogs, and forests, over rivers, creeks, and streams, the Alaska Highway goes on. People have used it, first a trickle, then a flood, in a motley vehicular parade. Trucks and cars of all descriptions driving through the dust and mud. The overland connection, it was made. It's taken headlights by the hundreds and windshields by the score as migrants left their homes and ventured forth. Hitchhikers, workers, families, truck drivers, tramps, and more reach with their own reasons for heading north. More than just a highway, it symbolizes dreams. For the people who have used it, it is more than what it seems. Through the mountains, bogs, and forests, over rivers, creeks, and streams, the Alaska Highway goes on. pavement and they've straightened out the bends. Some say the adventure's long gone past, that now is showing tendencies of much more modern trends. That's the thing about frontiers, they never last. But it's still a long, long ways when you start from Dawson Creek, and it's still the same huge country all the way. It's still the way to travel if it's the Northland that you seek, where so many who come to visit have to stay. More than just a highway, it symbolizes dreams. For the people who have used it, it is more than what it seems. Through the mountains, bogs, and forests, over rivers, creeks, and streams, the Alaska Highway goes on. More than just a highway, it symbolizes dreams. For the people who have used it, it is more than what it seems. Through the mountains, bogs, and forests, over rivers, creeks, and streams, the Alaska Highway goes on and on and on and on.
Driving both ways on a two-lane road, pushing night and day. The harder driving to her love, further on her way. Time, change, changing players in the same old game. Time, change, they got my number and they got my name. Found a note, I dropped my suitcase and I read what she wrote. Too many mornings without a kiss, too many letters that she tried to miss. I won't be working on the road no more, I won't be crying pain. Good intentions that you'll never know won't bring her back again. Time, change, change players in the same old game. Time, change, they got my number and they got my name. Drop it in the slot and ask for the time. I get no answer, no reply. Waiting for the change, I know it's mine. Miles of asphalt, heat and sweat. World doesn't care. Long distance love isn't half as good. It's just being there. Time, change, change players in the same old game. Time, change. They got my number and they got my name. No time, change. Time, change. Yeah, time, change. Time, change. Time, change. Time, change.
Ituasiku, Nukte Yankakut, Lingitaku, Suhakat, Kwan, When Kitas Yawaku. Yadi. All right.
Anticipated that he would not be left to carry such a priceless object in absolute freedom. Hadn't almost 1 million of his ancestors died for the sake of this same treasure? But the shot
It's here, it's all around you, and you have a great appreciation for what this country is and the beauty of it, and I think that's what Whitehorse offers.
Kewaunee is a wilderness park. It's such a big area of wilderness that that's its main attraction. It contains Canada's highest mountains. There's the largest non-polar ice fields.
Well, I think people that come to Haines come for the same reasons they've always come, and that's for the outdoor recreation and the fishing, hiking, photography, and the camping that's here.
regardless of what southeast community you live in, you don't have to spend very much time there before you've driven on virtually every road from one end to the other. Well, that's just one of the small things that happens when you live in Southeast. Hello, I'm Scott Foster. Welcome to Rain Country. But every once in a while, despite the advantages that Southeast communities have to offer, you get that itch to get out on the road and to drive more than 20 or 30 miles, to just see that endless road going over the next hill and around the next corner. We got that itch too, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
And we begin our traveling in the Yukon as we continue the second part of our drive over the Golden Circle route. We started in Skagway, went through Carcross, and ended up here in Whitehorse.
Oh yeah, I'll try this one. I ran out of banjo. Oh no! Take it! Take it! Take it! Take it! Take it!
The Golden Circle is about a 360-mile highway loop connecting Haines and Skagway through the Yukon and Whitehorse. It may be started anywhere. We began with the sites in Skagway.
We have an awful lot of product for people to see and look at. Skagway's colorful past is reminiscent of the buildings and the turn-of-the-century architecture, and many of the buildings on Broadway date back to the gold rush. And that whole setting, that whole Broadway atmosphere is really carried out through the entire community.
The drive out of Skagway follows the White Pass, one route used by those seeking fortunes in the Klondike gold fields in 1898. Not too long after the miners struggled up this valley, the White Pass and Yukon Railroad was built. It now makes summertime day trips along one side of the pass. Along the other, the road climbs 3,300 feet in 14 steep miles to the summit. And then it's on to Canadian Customs, the different kinds of vegetation found on the dry side of the pass, and the town of Carcross.
Carcross is looked at, I think, very ideally by a lot of people because it's a small town. It's in a very beautiful location in the mountains and the lakes, and it's also very close to our capital city. So it's just an hour's drive from Whitehorse. It's also a very beautiful drive from Whitehorse to Skagway. So it's in the best of locations, you know, halfway to the coast and halfway to our capital, where you can basically be involved with anything you like. So you have a mixture, the best of all things, really, by living in Carcross.
Just outside Carcross is a turnoff with a sign claiming this to be the world's smallest desert. And on up the road, another turnoff allows an overlook of an emerald-colored lake. Just outside of Whitehorse is Miles Canyon. For the 98ers, Miles Canyon was a rapids that claimed boats and gear. Today, a dam has backed up the Yukon and flooded the rapids, leaving a picturesque viewpoint of another part of Gold Rush history. In Whitehorse, one of the most obvious reminders of the golden days sits next to the highway it used to run.
There were about 200 of these vessels going up and down the Yukon River. They were the lifeline of the Yukon. They opened her up and let it so that us Yukoners could be here today and be visited by people from all over the world. In the 1960s, Parks Canada decided to commemorate the Yukon River boats, so they restored her to her original form. Everything you see will be the 1937 to 1940 era.
The riverboat is just one of the obvious things for visitors to see in Whitehorse. Attractions like this make up only one part of a town's character, and it's usually quite different from the town local residents know.
You go to a large city and all at once there's too many people. You walk down the street in a large city and you look for a familiar face that you're so used to seeing when you're in Whitehorse.
People that are willing to take risks, who aren't necessarily always playing it safe, I think they thrive here, who maybe tend to buck tradition. I think they do well.
I always say that if you like it the first week you're here, you're going to stay, and if you hate it, it's no use planning on staying.
I recognize that it's a place that I could easily settle down and have a family here and know that they have the best of everything, really. They have very good schools here. If you want your kids outdoors and active, it's here, it's all around you, and you have a great appreciation for what this country is and the beauty of it, and I think that's what Whitehorse offers.
Some other things that Whitehorse offers appeal to visitors as well as residents. And for first-time visitors, a couple of them might be surprising. They're more often associated with towns located much further south, rather than one that's only 400 miles south of the Arctic Circle. In downtown Whitehorse, just across the street from the historic Yukon River, is the McBride Museum's collection of historic relics and an old building that has a lot to do with Northland lore. It's Sam McGee's cabin, a man more remembered in death than life because of poet Robert Service. In 1905, Service was attending a Whitehorse banquet when he heard the story of two prospectors at Lake LaBarge. When one died and it was too cold to dig a grave, the survivor instead cremated him. After the dinner, Service went back to his room and stayed up all night writing The Cremation of Sam McGee. In the outside display yard next to McGee's cabin are some of the early means of transportation in the Yukon. And inside the museum are 2 floors of displays. Another attraction for highway travelers is a hot springs, located just a few miles outside of Whitehorse. The Alaska Highway is a bit of history itself. It was built as a military supply route during World War II, and after the war it was a key to opening the Yukon and Alaska. Today its 1,400 miles is paved with asphalt and is the one overland route connecting Alaska with the rest of the U.S. through the Yukon and British Columbia. There are some obvious differences for Southeasterners between the roads back home and this highway, like the use of kilometers, the presence of billboards, driving with headlights on, a road without intersections that actually goes somewhere, and most dramatically, the long vistas that allow eyes to reach to horizons unblocked by dense stands of rainforest or steep mountain faces. Junction is 100 miles from Whitehorse, and it's one of the only places in a long way that a driver has to make a decision on which road to take. This junction in the road is a government center and headquarters for Khu.eex National Park. It's also a small town in the far north that attracts a certain kind of person.
In Haines Junction, there's about 500 people, and you get to know most people that way, and you're friends with everybody. And although at times it can be, everyone knows your business as well, there's also always the concern for you, and if anything, if you ever need any help, there's always people there for you. So I enjoy that aspect of it, and it's also Haines Junction just being in the north, and it's very much an outdoor type place to live. You have to enjoy getting out hiking, skiing in the winter time, and just being outdoors more, making your own type of recreation rather than counting on having a theater available or to be able to go to a movie or something like that. You have to be able to make your own enjoyment.
Contrast life in Haines Junction in the summer and in the winter for a year-round visit.
Well, the winter's very, very quiet. When it's cold, there's not much goes on. Then your spring skiing starts in February, March, when the sun gets a little bit higher, and then there's some actually very excellent skiing, spring skiing. And but if it's cold, there's not much moving, and of course there isn't any tourists around, so it's just the locals basically here.
Well, you all know each other. You're all kind of, or is it the same? You have some friends and some enemies, or?
Oh, you know everybody. You know, there's. Of course, the longer you be here, there's some new people come in that I'm not too familiar with, but you basically know everybody that's in the whole town.
Most people are involved in the tourism industry for sure, with the national park or owning motels or restaurants, and it's open in the summer, and everybody goes full blast in the summertime. You don't get a lot of time to visit in the summer, and that's what makes it nice in the wintertime is a lot of things close down, and people will still be around to visit and enjoy each other's company then. But because you don't see a lot of people in the summertime, it's a nice combination between the summer and winter visits in the winter and go full blast in the summertime.
And the main summer attraction is Khu.eex National Park, 8,500 square miles of wilderness. The headquarters and visitor center stands on a knoll near the junction in Haines Junction and provides a view of the first park peaks. Inside are displays and information about the park. The last leg of the Golden Circle route leads from Haines Junction to Haines. For part of the way, the road parallels the park boundary, so that means easy access to the edges of Khu.eex.
Each of the towns along this route has its own role in the gold rush history of the North. And as you're looking at your maps and counting off the miles or the kilometers, it's easy to look forward to each town and the attractions they have to offer. But when you're making this trip, it's probably a mistake to spend all of your time in the towns, because just outside of Haines Junction, there's a national park, Khu.eex National Park. It's a massive wilderness area, and it offers an opportunity for people to get out of doors and enjoy a large part of what this country is all about.
Khu.eex is a wilderness park. It's such a big area of wilderness that's its main attraction, although other things such as it contains Canada's highest mountains. There's the largest non-polar ice fields found in the area. There are attractions to the area, and yet they're very hard to get to. So I think the main reason people want to come to here is to just traveling along the edge of Khu.eex and getting the feeling of the wilderness area that they're in.
Those traveling off the highway experience a completely different kind of park. Lake Kathleen has the park's only prepared campsites. Camping is allowed anywhere within Khu.eex Greenbelt as long as campers pre-register. Park officials also provide interpretive programs, give campfire talks, and lead hikes, like the one to King's Throw.
Where we're going to be hiking today is along this old road here, and then leaving the trail, or the old road, and climbing up onto the mountainside. You're welcome to join in for as long as you want to, and if you decide that you've had enough or want to come back, just let me know before you go, and I'll count down from my 15, so I was keeping track of how many people we have together. Yeah.
This trail begins in a forested area at the lake. As the trail climbs 4,000 feet, the vegetation changes, and hikers are able to see the slow growth that takes place in this northern area. At this trail's end in the high alpine country, there's a high overlook of Lake Kathleen. This is just one of many trails in the park. Some take only a half hour to hike, others require several days. There's also fishing in lakes and rivers along the way, and whenever the mood strikes, it's possible to just pull off the road and pursue your pleasure. It's 160 miles from Haines Junction to Haines. Part of this highway follows the original Dalton Trail, an historic toll road built by gold rush entrepreneur Jack Dalton. One pull-off along the way is at the $1 Million Falls. Access to the falls is along a maze of boardwalks and connecting ramps that look like the entrance to a Cliff family Robinson home. The origin of the name $1 Million Falls is unknown, but a nearby sign offers some guesses, such as a plane carrying $1 million payroll crashing near here, or $1 million of highway construction equipment might have been buried here, or it cost over $1 million to set up the construction site located near here, or the cost of construction of the Haines Road to this point cost $1 million. Like the Alaska Highway, the Haines Road was built during World War II as part of the war effort.
This section of highway from Haines Junction back to Haines holds a lot of the contrasts for anyone who spends their time driving in southeast Alaska. We finally gotten the rain back now too. One of the differences in southeast, you're driving on short roads, and either side of the road is either water or else the rainforest of southeast. But here, we're up above timberline, and you can see in these wide valleys the road stretching out, it seems like, for miles ahead of you. We can tell we're getting closer to home, though. Up ahead for the last hour or so, there's been a bank of clouds trying to get over the pass. That's the pass we're going over and dropping down into Haines up ahead.
Like the Klondike Highway from Skagway, this Haines Road is important to the residents of Haines. Chip Waterbury is Haines Tourism Director.
Many thousand people a year travel on that Haines Highway, of course, because we're a link between the ferry system and the highway. So it's really the lifeline of town, our access. People drive to Whitehorse or to Anchorage or Fairbanks from here. So we're very much a part of the mainstream transportation because of the highway and the ferry system.
How are you today?
Just fine.
And what is your citizenship?
Well, we're all from the U.S., live in Juneau.
Live in Juneau. How long have you been in Canada?
Let's see, we left Skagway Monday morning and just driven the loop and coming back home now.
Have you acquired anything or purchased anything in Canada that you have with you now?
Just some food is all.
No pets or animals, agricultural products?
No.
Very good. Have a nice day.
Okay, thanks very much.
Bye now.
Bye.
Well, I think people that come to Haines come for the same reasons they've always come, and that's for the outdoor recreation and the fishing, hiking, photography, and the camping that's here. And people come because they just like the town. It's a small town, and there's local artists that work here, and it's very beautiful and very relaxing. The best things to see in Haines, of course, the Chilkat Indian dancers are well worth seeing. We have an outstanding museum in Haines, and it's really one of the best in Alaska.
Another part of the Haines history stands on its own in large, stately lines above the Green Parade grounds. Fort William Seward was established in the early 1900s. These houses were the officers' residence. One of the buildings has been turned into the Alaska Indian Arts Carving Center. Here, while artists work, visitors watch and chat. One question they frequently ask Charles Jimmy Sr. is the kind of wood he uses.
I tell him, like, most of the time I'm working in birch, but because birch is, there's a lot of birch around here, and it's a beautiful wood. We don't have cedar that grows here that's any size, so we have to ship south of us to get red cedar and yellow cedar to carve in, see. And we have to get it from the corporation, like, say, at Tlekwan, the village up here, 20 miles or so. They have an island down there. But I like to talk, you know, they ask questions. They come up here for information. They come up seeking things, and nobody tells them nothing. They say, oh, I love all these totem poles. I love everything. But what do they mean? The colors, you know, I tell them about the different three colors, the traditional colors that we use. And I explain as much as I can in the short time that I have with them. Sometimes they come in on a bus and, you know, they're 10 minutes or so, and there's 20 or 30. Well, it's pretty hard to, you know, I have to get them together. And then I tell them as much as I can, as much in the short time. But I have a lot of fun doing it.
Sometimes visitors go to places like the Arts Carving Center to find examples of local life. And sometimes just driving around Haines produces the same thing.
This is what I do to make my living in the summertime. I hang brand new nets for the fishermen, and I repair old nets. The name of my business is Sherry's Net Hanging and Repair. And I've been doing this for about 14 years now. There's an awful lot of people who fish here. The rest either survive on working out at the mill or something having to do with the tourist industry, I think.
What keeps this community alive? What's the, you know, the economic forces that people can survive?
A lot of things, a lot of little things. I think, like every place in Alaska, we're always looking for a big deal, you know, a big event. But the fact of the matter is, it's a lot of little things. It's transportation and the sawmill and fishing and all these people working at these different jobs. Government is important here, the payrolls, but economically I think the town has come alive since the addition of the, economically speaking, come alive since the addition of the sawmill here, because it has added a lot of jobs in Haines. But we have fishing. More than 80 families are supported by fishing here. So it's a lot of these things together.
And when they're not working, Haines residents and visitors alike use the parks that are nearby.
If you bring a car or rent a car, you go see the parks. And they're really, I think, sort of the crown jewel of Haines. They're so beautiful and such a nice way to get out to the recreation around them. What we do is we go to Chilkat State Park, south of town, 7 miles. There's a hiking trail there and very good photography of the glaciers out there. There's boating. And then Chilkoot Lake reminds me of Lake Louise in the Canadian Rockies. Big mountains all around it and a great big deep lake. Good fishing, nice campground.
This week on Rain Country, we've been on the road, traveling some 400 miles, visiting our neighbors to the north. We'll be back again next week and travel down some different highways. You're invited to join us then on our next edition of Rain Country. I'm Scott Foster. Have a good day.